Okay, so while we're waiting, I will just tell you the rules of the game. You will have 25 minutes, you probably already know that, followed by 15 minutes of questions by whatever role you're going to impose upon us. And then we can break roles and have general discussions. So you are not to identify what school you're from. We are not to identify our affiliations. I guess if anybody chooses, they can talk about their work job. So what is the role that we are to play in this instance?
You are Whole Foods and also the VP of Amazon Technologies, since they are under the parent subsidiary company of Amazon.
We're Whole Foods what?
Whole Foods Executive Board, along with the VP of Technologies for Amazon, who's also the CTO and CIO for Whole Foods.
The Executive Board of the Board of Directors.
Yeah.
Amazon, since Amazon bought Whole Foods, we're representing the CIO and the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer,
yes.
The Chief Investment Officer?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Of
he
Amazon?
is of Whole Foods, and then he's also the VP of Amazon Technologies. Mm. He has a joint role.
Oh, got it. Okay. So all of us are playing that role.
If you would like to distinguish, like a single person is the VP and then the rest are the Whole Foods executives.
Okay. So basically Whole Foods executive.
Yeah.
We just didn't want to because we didn't know which questions you'd be most comfortable asking. We want you to have the full scope of opportunities and not be limited by the one person being them.
Yeah, we're talking to Amazon and Whole Foods as a subsidiary of Amazon.
Right. Okay, got it. All right, take it away.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us here today to discuss how you can leverage the synergy between Whole Foods and Amazon to revolutionize the grocery industry. What we, Foresight Consulting, will bring for you today will not only impact consumers, retailers, and the suppliers, but the entire supply chain and transform the way you can measure the economic impact of the goods you are selling. So first, we will introduce the team who will be working for you on the path to get to that stage. I am Tatiana Mark, the strategy specialist.
Hi, I'm James Steele, your industry specialist.
I'm Iona Brooks, your market analyst.
And I'm Drew Siegel, your financial analyst.
So, you have said it best in your mission statement. Your purpose is to nourish the people and the planet. And because of that, that provides a great foundation. We don't need to question what we want to do, but how to do it. And that's where we come in. So this is our strategy outline. Our strategy is separated into two separate parts that both rely on the collection of environmental data. Part 1 will work on the modification of the pre-existing Whole Foods app and integrating this environmental data in the form of challenges and other means. In Part 2, we entitle it the EPD Cloud, which is more where Amazon Technologies come in, and it discusses creating an EPD Cloud database for both suppliers and retailers to have a common ground to discuss and see this environmental data. So you could say that Part 1 is consumer focused, while Part 2 is a producer focus. So what you will get at the end of this. The Whole Foods app modification is something so when your consumers go on the Whole Foods app, they're not just seeing the economic impact with the prices, the nutritional impact based on nutrition labels, but the entire economic impact and whole cost of the goods that they are buying. And this way, we'll also encourage sustainable behavior through gamifying it and adding challenges that will work with our partner brands. Then, as we move to the EPD Cloud, this will be a database that will increase supply transparency through the entire supply chain. Because at every level, they will not only have the data linux to inform their situation, but it will be shared between the areas of the supply chain to promote transparency.
So we've spoken about EPDs a little bit, and I want to clarify what they are for you from a baseline off the bat. When we say EPDs, we want you to imagine an environmental nutrition label for products. They currently only exist in the construction industry, but we're planning to move them into the realm of consumer products. Above all, an EPD is objective, simple, and comparable between products.
So, sustainability is thrown around a lot, but we have to focus in on what that really means for us and for you. So it means a holistic view with forward looking on the implications of your actions. It's an impactful way so that you can put more resources into the world than you're taking out, and you're really seeing how what you do affects future generations as well as today.
So, now that we've introduced our topic to you, let me walk you through what else we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you some broad market analysis, and then we're going to dive into our app strategy and our EPD cloud strategy, before looking at some additional things that we considered, and then concluding on the topic. So, to look at our topic very broadly, we want to see how you as Whole Foods can creatively promote sustainable production and consumption, and leverage the partnership with Amazon technology to truly innovate the grocery industry. This is a really unique partnership that you have because it allows you to transcend the razor-thin margins that the rest of the grocery industry has, and really utilize the Amazon technology to innovate the way that we look at emissions and sustainable data within the grocery industry. So how are we going to do this? We're going to do this through our environmental product declaration evolution, and we're doing this in 2 key phases: integrating new technologies and environmental data into the Whole Foods app, which creates an interactive experience for your consumers. And then we're going to invest and develop a database and interface using cloud technology for EPD data. We looked at 2 primary sustainable development goals when doing this analysis. Firstly, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure focuses on removing emission and other inefficiencies within the supply chain process, and we see you focusing on this in 2 key ways. Firstly, through our innovative app solution, which revolutionizes the way that consumers can identify with their environmental data. Then through infrastructure. With our EPD cloud, we see this revolutionizing the supply chain within the grocery industry. Then we identify with Sustainable Development Goal number 12, responsible consumption and production, which also focuses on removing emissions within the consumption and production processes. And again, we see this with our EPD cloud, allowing producers to really identify where their emissions are and compare themselves, and with our app, which allows consumers to make more easy and accessible sustainable choices. We also see these 2 tangential goals relating to our strategy of climate action and decent work and economic growth. So, to take a big look at what the grocery industry does to our planet, food production accounts for 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That is the 2nd largest contributing sector after heat and electricity generation, which is huge. And this can be broken down further into emissions from livestock, crop production, land use, and the supply chain. This emission is creating a greater market for the organic and sustainable foods market, which has a projected growth rate of 6.2% per year over 2023 to 2032, with the industry reaching a value of $170.8 billion by the year 2032. This is particularly relevant to you as North America has the largest market share in the organic and sustainable foods, with a market share of 35.11%, and has a really unique customer base who's driven by environmentalism, health, and ethics. So let's take a closer look at this consumer. Within North America, 78% of consumers said that a sustainable life is important to them. Furthermore, 60% of consumers would pay more for a sustainable product. And we can see this directly translated over into sales growth statistics. Products that make environmental, social, and governance-related claims achieve disproportionate growth of 6.4%, as compared to only 4.7% for those that don't. That's a 36% increase, which is a huge and significant difference. However, this also creates an issue in the grocery industry: greenwashing. Motivated by marketing to this consumer, we see greenwashing, which is the use of false or misleading advertising or marketing practices to make products seem more sustainable than they are. This could include saying 50% increase in recyclable materials when that's moved from 2% to 3%. This is a major issue, as 1 in every 3 public companies was associated with greenwashing in 2022. And we see the app that we're creating as a way for you to differentiate yourself from your competitors and show your consumers that we can really back up that our products are sustainable with this data. Additionally, there were 4 times as many instances of greenwashing in 2022 as 2018, which is a huge increase and shows the prevalence of this issue. And it's important to consider this is only from data that we know to be reliable. A lot of the current system of collecting environmental data may not even be entirely accurate. So we propose our EPD system, which makes sure this is verifiable data. Despite consumers' best efforts, it's become ever more difficult for them to shop sustainably due to the deceptions of greenwashing, which is a major issue we look to address through our strategy.
So, seeing as this is a contemporary issue, we need to evaluate it from a contemporary framework, and we decided to adopt the ideas of Paul Hawken with ecological business. Pardon me. So, Paul Hawken was the first ever creator of a natural foods production company in the United States with Erewhon in the 1960s. He published the book Natural Capitalism, which outlined the ecology of capitalism and commerce, and he believes that market-driven environmental innovation is the only way for companies to advance into the future sustainably, and we completely agree. So, the link between Amazon and Whole Foods. As we stated earlier, in 2017, Amazon purchased Whole Foods for $13.7 billion, its largest acquisition to date, and since then, innovation has grown by leaps and bounds. Whole Foods went from a company losing money to rated in 2023 by Rockbridge and Fordham University, the second most innovative grocer in the United States. So we see this path, this trajectory only moving forward into the future in greater ways. So, in evaluating our key considerations, we believe that Amazon and Whole Foods are perfectly set up. With its 400 plus physical locations in the United States, Whole Foods creates the perfect launch ground for Amazon's innovation and almost endless supply of capital. And we believe that this will allow us to meet the demands of consumers, which increasingly call for sustainable products and transparent means of understanding the ecological impact of the goods they purchase, while allowing brands to maintain their bottom line, as well as innovate into the sustainable future. So, understanding strategy. As we stated earlier, our strategy comes in a twofold operations scheme. The first being consumer-focused app strategy and followed by the EPD cloud. First, we're going to talk about our app strategy, which is the app modification strategy. But, like I said, I defined EPDs in a sort of loose way, and I'd love to be concise, but the truth of the matter is that they're enormously complicated. So, this is a little bit dense. But understanding EPDs, before you can create an environmental product declaration, you have to conduct a life cycle assessment of a product. So, to create an LCA, it's a raw, compiled form of all of the environmental output of a product. And once your LCA is created, you can finally create an EPD. So to conduct an EPD, you have to conduct your LCA first of all, of course. Secondly, identify key indicators and prepare your standardized EPD. And finally, and this is almost the most crucial, you have to create independent verification to understand that your EPD is objective. But once you do, your EPD will be standardized, independently verified, and transparent, comparable information of environmental performance of a product is accessible to consumers. Even so, developing EPDs is a little bit complicated.
We didn't do that. I think that was it said 0 minutes remaining, which I don't know how that.
Pardon.
Where's our IT?
Yeah, check out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're at 10 minutes for time. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I saw that and I was hoping that that wasn't the case, but as soon as it was flashing.
I saw that too, and I thought, what is that?
I thought maybe it was saying that if you don't move off the slide, it will battery.
Can I try to turn it back on, like manually?
Yeah.
There you go.
Wonderful. Is there a way to move back?
Yeah, we have to go back.
Okay.
So, sorry, let me start my time back up. So, developing EPDs. To develop EPDs, the most crucial thing that you need is an enormous data storage base, which is where Amazon comes into play with its Amazon Web Services already existing cloud database. So once you have that database, you can gather primary data from your partners, in this case grocers, and third, process and analyze this data to create your EPDs. But even so, EPDs are enormously complicated, even in their raw form as they exist currently. So Whole Foods must develop a way to clearly communicate results to consumers. This is why we introduced the Whole Foods app.
So, as you can see, Whole Foods already has a great app that's aesthetically pleasing and has category-based search options. It emphasizes local goods, and it's already integrated with the Amazon technology. But there is room for improvements to distinguish yourself between other grocers further. And as we look at those modifications, the main thing is integrating user-friendly information based on the EPDs. That is going to be the core of all of these other changes, which will occur gradually as the technology advances. The minor changes would be expanding to divide products by consumer sustainability goal. Right now, the consumer can go in and see, I want a keto diet, I want a gluten-free diet, but we want them to see, these are the companies that are best on carbon emissions. This is the least amount of land use. So they take an incentive on what they really want to work on. Along with adding the wallet feature, right now other grocers allow you to see the prices of the goods that you bought so you can kind of keep track. Currently, the Whole Foods app doesn't do this, and we think they should, and take it even a step further by saying the specific environmental impact each grocery receipt has. So then we move on to gamifying sustainability, which is the major change that we are proposing. And with this, we are adding a challenges tab to the app. To explain better, we want to talk about how behavioral change is a scientifically method proved to help change behavior towards the positive. We will do this through the Strava model. For those of you who are unaware, Strava is an app that's focused in the fitness industry, where it's kind of like social media where you can post your activities, but along with that, brands sponsor challenges such as do 250 minutes of activities in the next month, run 5 miles. And when people accomplish those goals, they get incentives by the brand, such as discounts or getting free products, which makes them much more likely to complete these goals. So when you put this into Whole Foods, that means that using that EPD data, you can create challenges such as build and purchase a net zero carbon emissions grocery list of at least 10 items. It might be sponsored by something like Alter Ego, another sustainable brand that's already sold at Whole Foods. While this might seem like a lofty goal, these challenges might be a little bit more minor in the beginning once you don't have that full data, but once it is, this is the end goal. And this will strengthen brand partnerships, increase consumer engagement, and really bring Whole Foods' mission to the forefront. And for the environment, not only is it the single person can make a difference kind of idea, but it's also on the idea that if the consumer can see this, then suddenly the supplier is pressured to make changes when the consumer doesn't like what they see.
To incorporate these components into the app, we recommend investing roughly $1.1 million over the course of 2 years. Now, this is going to include your team of software developers, as well as the additional infrastructure needed to sustain the increase in engagement that your consumer has with your app. We also incorporated the additional costs needed to pilot and test this new feature so that you perfect your interaction with your consumers. Now, once the app is developed, we estimate that it will cost roughly $1.6 million a year. As you can see, a huge portion of this cost is due to marketing. We find that marketing is absolutely essential and even recommend an additional $4 million in marketing that first year to really drive a change in consumer behavior. What you're doing, Whole Foods, is revolutionizing the way that consumers shop for their goods, and it is fundamental to invest and prime your consumers for the change within your app. Now, the app, and specifically the challenges within the app, provide an additional revenue stream. So brands will pay $75,000 to sponsor these smaller challenges that you incorporate in the app, and $100,000 to sponsor the larger challenges. The first year that you roll this out, we expect 24 large challenges and 36 small ones. However, this will grow as consumers accustomed to the challenges incorporated in your app, and as these brands want to make more sustainable efforts and incorporate themselves within the challenges. Now we're going to be moving on to the second strategy, EPD Cloud.
So it's really essential that when we're looking at the movement of EPDs into the grocery industry, we look at the policy shifts that are going to be occurring. And we can do this through the analogous case of EPDs within the construction industry. Over the last few years, we've seen the European Union be regulation trailblazers across environmentalism. And we can especially see this with EPDs in construction. EN 15804, passed in 2014 and amended in 2019, outlines a list of ways in which producers need to align their construction products with environmental data. We initially saw this in the European Union, but it transferred over in just 2021 to the US with Buy Clean policies, which encourage EPDs and emission transparency in the US through programs such as grants and incentives. Now, this is important within the construction industry because we see this directly transferring over to the grocery industry with the Farm to Fork strategy in the European Union, which is setting up an outline for a sustainability labeling framework, including the use of EPDs within the grocery industry. We predict that over the next few years, this is going to progress in the same way that construction has to come into the US market and to really revolutionize the way that we're looking at this data. And we see this happening by 2040 to align with the European Union and the United States climate goals. Now, what's really exciting about this is that Amazon has already pledged net zero emissions by 2040, 10 years ahead of the United States and European Union. So this allows us to align with not only this policy that's coming, but for you to align yourselves and promote yourselves to your consumers as a brand that really cares about sustainability and is following through with that through our strategy. as these policies become regulation, firms are going to have a demand for the development of EPDs in the grocery industry. So it's essential that you get ahead of this so you can capitalize on that market early.
And this is where the retailer isn't just Whole Foods now. It is all grocers. And the suppliers are all the brands that service these retailers. And connecting them is this EPD cloud database. So what this is basically the data that we collected must be worked on with the Amazon technological scientists to figure out how to conveniently make them into these EPDs. As this happens, it will make an algorithm that all of this data that's coming from the suppliers, they can subscribe, put it in, and the EPD will come out for them. And not only will it do that, but then as their retailers subscribe to them, they can see all the brand's data and be knowledgeable about what they are purchasing. Along with this, it will give analytics for both sides so they can see how they improve. This impact makes a whole new cloud area where Amazon is at the forefront. It lets them be the leader in all EPD construction or EPD creation, which can branch out eventually and further their innovation goals. And for Whole Foods, they get first access to this technology. They get to be the industry leader, and obviously they are not paying the costs associated with getting this data because they are a subsidiary of Amazon. And now, the entire marketplace has increased transparency, reduced greenwashing, and they can also have informed decision making that increases efficiency. It will simplify the supply chain when all the data is in one place. And now, there are so many benefits, both for retailers and suppliers. One of the really exciting things for suppliers is when they're thinking about maybe changing something in their supply chain, they can put that new information in and directly see how that would cause an impact to help make their decisions. Along with that, retailers, the interesting thing about EPDs is they're very location specific. So if you have a Whole Foods in California versus a Whole Foods in Chicago, they have different products that will have different environmental product declarations since the cost to get them there is different. So each specific store can see this information and say, these are the brands that work best for me. Along with this, the analytics and data storage is amazing for both sides, and the mutual pressure to join once the fact that it makes it easy, the more people that are involved in it will allow this to grow exponentially.
Whole Foods and Amazon, you are pioneering the introduction of EPDs into the grocery industry. Because of this, you must invest resources into this initiative. As you can see, roughly half of the resources goes towards data analytics, and the other half goes towards data collection. Now, as suppliers begin to use this database to produce EPDs, they'll be supplying their own information, thus the cost for data collection will decrease drastically. We also want to point out that because of Amazon's current infrastructure and resources, there are huge cost savings in this component. The annual operating cost will be roughly $1.2 million, and this incorporates your maintenance, legal, and your marketing costs. Now, the EPD cloud has a huge potential to be a huge revenue source in the future. We project that this grows at a 40% CAGR, or growth rate. And what drives this high growth is the push in sustainability efforts by suppliers and retailers alike, and that at Amazon you will be positioned as the gold standard for EPD production. These are the prices that will sell EPDs per EPD to the suppliers, and the price that we'll charge the retailers to subscribe to the overall database.
So we have to consider a few additional considerations. The first being legal. This is a completely new form of revenue, and we're proposing a complete upheaval of the current grocery system. So the currently existing laws that most stringently must be abided to are ISO 1404044 and the SOC 215027001 laws, which both determine the international creation of EPDs right now. We can't pretend like there's not going to be a host of new laws created, but what is actually sensational is that this is such a novel idea that we get to be on the cutting edge of regulation and in fact work with regulators as the first to implement this. Of course, we must also consider consumer protection, data security standards, and transparency laws in the creation of our EPDs, as well as following the FTC's Green Guidelines, which currently exist in the US for creation of green products for consumers. As well as this, we have to consider the CSR foundations of your companies. So Amazon wants to be the most consumer-centric company on the planet, as well as Whole Foods, which aims to create the gold standard for groceries in person in the United States. This is your opportunity to do so into the future, as you have in the past.
And as we look at your commitment to ethical responsibilities, ESG has been growing so much, but there are fundamental issues with it. The way that it's not always transparent, and sometimes you're investing money, but you don't really know if you're getting the outcome that you need. EPDs are compatible with the ESG route, but it allows you to really measure the impact that you're having and put it towards a driven, concentrated change. And now, there will be so much change that you will enact through initiating this. Educate. You will be educating consumers on really what's going into their products and how they are affecting it. Really, the whole cost of goods. You are changing their behavior through these challenges. And then you're increasing producer transparency and improving practices by not only telling them where they're at, but giving them steps to improve. Now, you are driven by the U.S. goals. At the foundation is the industry, innovation, and infrastructure, which is a cornerstone of Amazon and a cornerstone of these processes. Building on that, you will have responsible consumption and production. Not only are you improving on these goals, you are providing the entire industry a measurable way to improve them. And that is the first step towards driving change. As we conclude, a prominent environmental ethicist that we discussed with Dr. Peterson said, when you want to create change, you have to make it easy. We are making it easy for consumers to see the information and create change within themselves. We are making it easy for suppliers and retailers to really create this change through seeing the analytics. All that we need to do is have the moral courage to start. Thank you. And now we will show our appendix, which, the table of contents. So you can see if there's anything else you would like further clarification on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would actually like some clarification because you had another, the later chart said it was, you were talking about your subscription price, and I wanted to know, how do you know, did you do some kind of market research on how you could sell that? Would they be willing to pay that? And then I saw a CAGR of like 40% of sales growth, but then earlier in the presentation I saw a chart with like 10 point something percent
Yes.
CAGR.
So we're
You
talking.
went so fast though, so I
Yeah.
was trying to see what was the beginning CAGR, the 10% growth, and then later the
course.
40%
So we can-
with the subscription.
Can I go back?
Please.
Yeah, use that.
So to keep it short, the first chart had to do with our first strategy, which involves the incorporating the challenges into the app. So
Oh,
right here.
that one, yeah.
So this has everything to do with the app and incorporating the challenges into the app. Now, of course, there's only so many challenges you can incorporate until consumers may get overwhelmed, which is why it's growing at a sustainable rate for consumers to pick up this behavior and really utilize the challenges. Now, the other chart.
So this is the immediate part, the beginning.
Yes.
Okay.
This has everything to do with incorporating the feature into the app.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the other chart is moving on to the second strategy, which is the EPD cloud
Got it. Okay.
and providing this data to consumers, or to creating EPDs for suppliers and providing that information to other retailers. And that's where we project the higher growth rate.
And we looked into a multitude of factors, but as we stated earlier, EPDs only currently exist in construction, so a lot of what we had to do was in large ways speculative. This is based off of real numbers, but at present there is no precedent for EPD cloud databases within the United States, and certainly not with groceries.
The exciting thing is, though, there is a little bit of where we can look towards. There's a company called Helix that does create these LCs and EPDs, but what they're doing is they kind of just do it for the supplier. And so we took those numbers and we inflated them a little bit because of the fact that you're not only getting you're not getting just getting the data, you're getting analytics with it, and you're getting a place to store the data, which makes it immensely more valuable. And then we also thought it was important to have the subscription model because we want this to be accessible to all grocers. Grocers that have less products are going to be paying less since they are subscribing per product that they are looking into. And we wanted this to change the entire grocery industry and not just affect those who could pay for it.
Can I ask a question about the finances here? You had one slide that showed a number of 1.1, and I'm not sure if that was millions, but it was over a 2-year program.
Yes. So
There's a billion?
Million.
million.
Oh, it's million?
Yes.
Ah.
So this is just developing the app, and after
I'm
research.
glad you asked that because I thought it was.
Yeah, so
Okay.
this is 1.1 million over the course of 2 years, and this has to do with developing the app. And after doing research, finding out And I can actually, let me,
I just assumed it was bigger number.
show you what.
It was 758 per year, as I recall.
Yes.
Well,
So,
okay.
yeah, so we calculated the software developing team as well as calculated how much the infrastructure costs and estimated
So
the.
that's the 2-year number.
Yes, so this is a 2-year number.
Got it.
We're lucky in the sense that a lot of the framework exists, in the sense that Amazon AWS already exists, as well as the fact that the Whole Foods app is up and running. So this is more of adding modifications to it in the implementation of the app.
Exactly.
I had a question with regard to the information that you're going to be providing. How does it work with small producers like local farms and that kind of stuff? How are they going to be able to provide you the information that you want if they're supplying Whole Foods?
That's a really good question. We were talking with an organic grocer that kind of goes through the USDA regulations. And so what happens is that there are people responsible for collecting this data just to have the organic labels and things like that. So a lot of this data is already given to Whole Foods to make sure that they're meeting their high quality standards, because Whole Foods is one of the strictest companies in allowing food into their grocery stores. So we are thinking that they already have a lot of this information, and along with that, brands are going to be incentivized to give this information because eventually it's going to become a law, and we're kind of facilitating the process, which is especially why we're reducing the price to enter into the market of the EPD database originally. And then for the Whole Foods brands, of course they get access to it because they're a Whole Foods brand. So they are really being able to have this information already by the other standards that they hold, if that makes sense.
So the reason I asked this question, pardon me for one second, is Tillamook got into a little trouble. They were saying that they were green, and they were accused of greenwashing because they were buying milk from other suppliers who weren't using green techniques and that kind of stuff. So that's why I'm asking the question. Smaller farmers here in the San Joaquin Valley. How do you transition? How do you make it easy, as someone said earlier? If you want to make change.
Yeah,
Correct.
No, it was somebody they quoted.
How do you make it easy for those small-time farmers as opposed to a Cog Hill or something like that?
From a policy perspective, actually really specific to California, there's something called the Buy Clean California Act, which is kind of a subset of the Buy Clean policies. And something that this does within construction is the government actually provides grants to smaller firms who are looking to collect these data but may not have the resources. So that is something when we're looking at policy changes that we think would be analogous within this data collection. And it's something that the government is already considering when they're enacting EPD policies, that there may be these smaller firms who can't necessarily collect that data reliably. And so these grant programs are kind of a safety net for those to make sure that that data is collected reliably and that they have the resources to do so.
So you'll work with the state legislature in developing legislation that will enable that, right?
That'd be our hope. And furthermore, Amazon is the only certified organic grocer in the United States already. So all of the supply chain that moves into Amazon already is accounted for from a sustainability perspective, from a basic supply chain perspective. So any grocer that's already working with Amazon at present that would want to be seen as organic would necessarily have to do so to be sold at Whole Foods.
Yeah, and I also want to add that even nowadays, so as you get more data, these EPDs get extremely more specific, and you get more really specific examples or specific quantities from the supply chain. But the whole data collection process is really gathering industry averages and pulling together large amounts of data to make the best, most possible accurate estimate of the emissions cost. So with this data, we will be able to incorporate that and use that to estimate the emissions caused by these smaller farms and producers as well.
Last question. What are you going to do about livestock? Cows, lambs, pigs, chickens. The environmentalists say that those are big polluters.
Well,
Yes.
that's exactly why these EPDs are so wonderful. Is because at present you can say to another person, oh, you shouldn't buy beef, oh, you should eat chicken. But you don't have a way to necessarily see exactly what this is. EPDs aren't telling you to do one thing or another. They're a completely objective measure of environmental output. So the output of, let's say, a beef cow compared to tofu will be measured in the EPDs. So what we're doing is we're putting the ability to see how transparent and how much environmental output goes into a product in the hands of consumers. So you will see, if you're purchasing red meat, that it will have a higher environmental output than, white meat or even, vegetable alternatives. So that's what's so great about this, is because at present, basically what you hear is speculation, or you have to be an incredibly actively informed consumer to know exactly what you're purchasing. You can find out now that, red meat isn't so great, or, as you said earlier.
Grass-fed is fine. That's what we're selling at Amazon.
No,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you.
No, you didn't scare me, I'll tell you that much.
but they emit methane gas, remember?
And so here's also the thing, we don't want to demonize any population. Like for me, I might have dietary restrictions that make it impossible to get the protein I need, maybe from the more vegetable based. So what we're saying is that here are your meat products, and maybe you can get the better meat alternative. So it's not just saying you have to go to vegetables, everyone has to be vegan, but it's kind of supporting more sustainable practices within that livestock, so you can limit that to as possible, and then the consumer can make a distinction between this red meat might not be the best for the environment, I still have to have some sort of meat, so maybe I'll shift towards this brand.
So, okay, I said one last
said what you
question. Will this app for the consumer calculate the environmental friendliness of their total purchases?
Yes.
So that before you go, if you're buying meat, you can offset that with other things?
And that's what's so excited with the challenges, is you'll be able to buy your product, see the impact you're making, and reach these challenges to really incentivize consumers to pay attention to the sustainable data that we provide them. So it's really, really fun aspect.
I'm very impressed with the presentation. I'm a little concerned about compliance, voluntary compliance from the suppliers, particularly when they may have to fund some of it. In your budget, have you considered maybe some political lobbying funds? Because, and a question, this seems very similar to the food ingredient label. Is there political or legislation requiring that, and could you mimic that a little bit?
Yes, so we can touch on the policy as well, but I do want to point out that because we can't wait around for policy to kickstand, we incorporated if you see is the revenue model for our EPDs, and then within the first 5 years we incorporated a 50% discount to suppliers to really push them to take on this initiative and subscribe and give us their data. So we're providing at a much cheaper point, which in turn saves money in the long run, because as Amazon and as your cloud, you get a lot more data to work off of it with future endeavors.
Furthermore, this will in the long run cheapen for both suppliers and grocers the price that they would be paying for EPDs, which we foresee that they will have to do eventually. Just seeing as how to create an individual database from a consumer to consumer, supplier to supplier basis would be extremely expensive, whereas we have the infrastructure already set up before the regulation comes to play.
And to kind of touch on the policy side of your question, when you look at the farm to fork strategy that I was talking about earlier, essentially what that is a sustainability labeling framework. It's the demand that's moving is towards having literally like an environmental label that tells you, this is the cost to your body, this is the cost to the environment. So that is where we see legislation moving. And as we saw with the trends with EPDs in construction, we really strongly believe that this mandates that are happening within the European Union are going to translate directly over to the US market to follow with that sustainability trend.
Because the farm to fork is in Europe, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I happened to see something this morning that kind of dovetails into this a little bit, and there's a question for you. What I saw, unfortunately, was a 25-year-old woman in New York had a cookie, and she happened to have a terrible peanut allergy. But what happened was the label on the cookie was a soy nut, and they have evidence in her phone that she Googled the soy nut to try to figure out what was in it. And she determined that this was an okay cookie for her to eat. And as it turned out, the cookie company changed their recipe, and so it ended up having peanuts instead of soy nuts. And now this woman's passed away, and a large grocer on the East Coast is saying now that they didn't know that there was a change. And the cookie manufacturer says, we have evidence, we have emails that we told your technology officer that was in charge of that we did make a change. So my guess is that you guys would be able to update those kinds of things in real time as recipes changed or things that might affect people's diets changed. Or yeah.
If I may, this is a question I'd love to answer. So this is exactly another reason why this is so perfect. You know, it's very likely, you know, the nuts were grown here in California and then sent over to the East Coast before they were sold in the grocery store. So that supply chain is extremely convoluted. So when they change their growing habits on the West Coast, it takes a long time to catch up with the East Coast, and there can be contingencies which, you know, have fatal consequences. That's exactly why this is perfect. As soon as suppliers change their growing practices, that changes their EPD, which means that it changes within our database automatically. So if growers decide that they're going to change the way they're growing in this situation soy nuts, as soon as they decide to do so, it changes within our cloud. So it would immediately be transferable to the markets on the East Coast, which would prevent anything like this happening.
Yeah, I think that's pretty
That's
significant.
really sad.
Now, when you're creating an EPD, it sounds like if I was a supplier, it's a lot of work on my end, and I also feel like from an Amazon point of view, if Amazon, i.e. Whole Foods, is asking me to provide all this so I can become an EPD, is Amazon legally responsible in any way, because I'm basically following their setup within their system, you know? So if I'm the supplier and I A, put a lot of time and effort into it, and B, maybe I don't do something quite right, is the organizational body that determines whether you have an EPD or not going to take responsibility for that? Or like where, you know, it seems like it could get a little bit messy only from the standpoint that Amazon is asking me for this information in order to be on their app, which I want to be as a supplier, you know.
It's definitely possible that we could get into the weeds with things like that, and I'm no legislator. But what I will say is that let me dial back. So first of all, from a legislative standpoint, there's nothing that really exists right now to explain it. So the legislation would likely evolve with the upfront costs, and we would be taking, you know, claimancy over a lot of the information. But what is nice is that a lot of the information that goes into an LCA, which is created into an EPD, already exists and has to be collected by consumers to be sold in a market so big as Amazon and the other, or Whole Foods. And then the other thing that happens is you could have made the same argument when they were trying to implement, you know, nutrition labels and products in the first place. We have to collect all this information. This is so difficult. But this is just a step towards consumer transparency. As we're nutrition labels, we see this being the next step in that direction. And it will never be cheaper than it would have been when we're selling to you guys. Because, as we said earlier, we have all the infrastructure necessary, and you guys have the information. There would be an additional upfront, but it would not be more expensive than it would have been in the long run.
I mean, that's a beautiful tie-in because you've got Amazon with all of its technology. So it's and knowing that the European Union is doing that, what did you call it, farm to fork? So we know it's going to travel over here. I mean, that's just how things work. So yeah, it seems like the perfect spot to start something like this because it's pretty revolutionary for the grocery industry.
And it's beautiful because EPDs exist in other industries like we've talked about, like construction. And Amazon is already using EPDs for other products. It's just that no one has thought to incorporate this into the grocery industry and provide that information to consumers to make educated decisions. It's on a very high level business standpoint, and we see there's no reason to limit that information down to the consumer base.
I can almost guarantee, this is just speaking to you guys personally, if this is the first you've heard of EPDs just as judges, you will be hearing about these for the next 20 years if you continue judging here. So we just want to be the first on the front lines.
Let me ask a question. So if we're going to get to the EPD labeling, doesn't that have to be regulated by a government first?
That's my point.
So going back,
Either state or federal. And I would think in the case of Whole Foods, it would have to be federal, right?
It's kind of like the auditor situation where originally we're putting these out as like a good faith effort, and then eventually they will be regulated just because, like we said, the regulation will follow. But in the beginning, it's a good faith effort where we will have independent auditors that aren't necessarily legislative bodies, but auditors that are professionals in their standpoint, and we will be working with the scientists and making sure that everything that they're putting into the algorithm that creates it is accurate to the highest of standards. Like right now, there are already companies doing this, and the same legislative bodies that eventually will regulate them will regulate Amazon, and the same people that are ensuring that those have high quality standards are going to go into this EPD.
So if we started our own, that's going to be incredibly expensive to do this through 50 states, right? So wouldn't it be wiser to work with the federal government to establish a standard?
Well, absolutely, and that's an inevitability, but we just want to make sure that as a private company, we're the first to do so, instead of waiting around for regulators to get on board, because we see it as an inevitability, of course. We've probably said I sound like a broken clock at this point, but the point is that Amazon wants to be the first to do so, so we're going to be working with regulators, but we want to push the regulation forwards instead of the regulators pushing us.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Well, yeah, I was agreeing with you. But like our goal is the 2040, we need to make change now, so we can't just wait for legislation when it's cheaper, because Amazon has an immense amount of resources, and with that comes a responsibility to really incite the change.
Sorry, and I didn't completely address that. Sorry. The other thing is, as we sort of heard yesterday, I don't know if you guys were at the talk at the dinner, but at present, auditors and consultation companies which work on sustainable auditing are all sort of doing their own thing, and it's not objective. So what is great about this is we're going to be creating the highest standard up until this point, which can be used from a regulatory framework, instead of having 200, 300 independent companies which are all doing regulatory environmental auditing for different companies. We're creating a system that allows each one to be comparable to the other.
Oh, and Steve, I want to be there when you're going to tell Jeff we're going to wait for the government before we implement this.
I have a small issue in that we keep talking about Amazon, but the culture of Whole Foods is to really support the small new supplier, and this is a death knell. So could we at least think about incorporating some kind of help for the little person? Actually, I'm old enough in my company when barcodes came in, believe it or not, they didn't always exist. It was a fight to the death to get it operational. I absolutely had a habit to run my company, and the big manufacturers, no problem. But all the little guys, it was a lot of hand holding and helping, and unfortunately, I had to cut some of them loose. So that's something that's kind of dear to my heart.
Well, I'll tell you this. This is the thing that's great about the EPDs, is that these smaller companies are almost certainly going to have a much smaller environmental output than huge corporations. So there will be assistance and there will be subsidiaries involved, we hope, for these smaller companies. But what's great is when these EPDs are made, you're going to be able to see that these tiny companies, which are operating within 100 miles of you, are going to have such a slim environmental output compared to huge companies that they're probably going to have a competitive advantage over big companies. And in fact, we hope that this will enfranchise smaller companies.
Great answer.
Think about being in Hawaii and buying Coca-Cola and seeing how many emissions were caused just for you to drink that can of Coca-Cola.
Right.
And you go over to the next fridge and you pick up a native-made can of soda and you look at the difference and you say, wow. And I mean, you couldn't believe with your own eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe one of the things on the app could be like, who's the most sustainable this week or something, and then if you wanted to really...
Hence the challenges.
And like separating based on the sustainability goals, because it's not just carbon emissions, it's water usage, it's land usage. And when someone has a real stake in that change and they say, I really care about land usage, they can focus their efforts towards that, and then there will be metrics to see if like Whole Foods has an overall goal, how much of that goal has been met. Do I want to go towards that, or do I want to go towards carbon emissions, and really have that?
So would Whole Foods be subsidizing these smaller producers, suppliers?
Well, at present, Whole Foods would be working within the framework of the suppliers that it already has. So any company that's already selling through Whole Foods has the information that would be needed to create an LLC and EPD. So at present, like the first thing that we're doing is we're taking advantage of the companies that Whole Foods has. So the smaller information comes from companies that already exist. And then as we create that framework, everything will become cheaper. There is a cheaper upfront cost for creating EPDs. So So I feel that I don't completely understand your question. Could you ask one more
I
time?
think I can cover. So of course we are supporting these companies because this data is what creates this algorithm and database. So we're not expecting them in the beginning to pay us to use it. We are saying, give us your data and we are going to make something useful for you. And then Whole Foods brands, because this is a Whole Foods idea, Whole Foods grown thing, these companies are benefiting the most. They're wanting to be in Whole Foods because this is where they can actually get help in becoming more sustainable, versus other brands that don't function within Whole Foods. When it launches to the rest of the world, they have to be like, oh, now I have to get in on this, because if a consumer goes to Whole Foods and sees it, then they're like, why can't I see that at Publix? Why can't I see that at Kroger? And then they will try to have to like catch up to Whole Foods and their brands.
All right, here's my, I wasn't clear, I guess. I'm producing kiwis in the San Joaquin Valley. That's all we do. We have, you know, and it's tough for us to make a living just to grow and sell these things, right? You now want us to put an EPD label on stuff. What I'm asking is, I don't have the technology to do that. I'm a farmer.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You don't have to have that technology, because all you need is the data that you're already required to have to be in Whole Foods, because every brand in Whole Foods has to follow like certain standards and give the information already.
But I'm not a supplier of Whole Foods. I want to be a supplier.
Well, then you just have to say the information that, because if you're doing like USDA organic, those people go to the farms, they go to the factories where it gets manufactured, they go to every stage. So this data already exists, and basically it's just like you getting that data from your supply chain, and then the endpoint brand is going to have it. But you're not saying you need this technology, which is what could make it so difficult for that kiwi grower. It's just saying, you give me the information you already have and I'll tell you about it.
So I don't have to be a chemist.
You don't have
The
to.
federal government will come in and make an assessment.
Yeah, and exactly, and as we're developing it, our own scientists will be out there, be on the ground, because if we want to know what goes into it, we have to see with our own eyes. So we will be at every stage and supporting throughout the entire supply chain.
And I want to add, all right, so let's say there's a much bigger company that grows kiwis out in Europe. So we have the full integration of their supply chain, right? They do the data, and then they collect data on the environmental impact of growing the kiwis in Europe, and then they ship it over. So we have all that, and then they ship it to, say, a factory, and then they truck it to a store. So now we have data from that farm in Europe, how it got to the city, and then the truck that takes it to the store. We can incorporate that data, specifically the truck that took it to the store, and just the farm itself and the environmental impact of growing a kiwi, and incorporate all that data with our algorithm to give the best production of the EPD for a local supplier. So the beauty of having all this data incorporated into one cloud computing service is that the algorithm can utilize this data to get a really fantastic, independently verified estimate of a local kiwi grower in California.
And there'd be a subset for growing and all the things, the components.
So exactly.
Sorry.
Oh, I would just, if I was that supplier, would I be able to use my EPA designation to other grocery stores that my product shows up at?
So that was something that we were looking into a lot, and the strategy behind it is that that's what makes it, it'll be mutual pressure from both the retailer side and the suppliers. Because if you're any brand that's in, say like the Ultimate Eco Chocolate, which is in other brands plus Whole Foods, and that goes into the database, then you could say, if you're Kroger and you also buy it, I'm already in this database, subscribe to it, and you get this information. And then suddenly it's a place for them to go. So since the data is all within the cloud, the suppliers, and they have to prove that they are selling that brand, so you're not getting information leak of like, oh, these are competitor brands, but you can get eventually overall data analytics. Like compared to the other brands that subscribe, you emit this many more carbon emissions with your brands. Maybe you need to reconsider. And since then you can take a deeper dive into it. That's where the analytics sharing is so amazing on having one aggregate model.
So are you saying that if I'm Kroger and I want to use that same chocolate company, that that chocolate company can call themselves, say on a label or something, that they have their EDP or verified or what have you, but I as Kroger would pay a certain amount of money to be able to see all the analytics to prove it to myself that they are, and that's the analytics that comes from Amazon?
And theoretically that, like, because if you're a Kroger, it's not going to be the same EPD as a Whole Foods because different supply chains,
Right,
different things.
right.
So you can't just copy what they have for Whole
Right.
Foods and stuff it in there. And even if Alter Eco, they're going to say, I have this data, but they didn't actually create it, so they can still give the data. But then that grocery store, which doesn't have, because of its razor thin margins, doesn't have the resources to
Right.
create the EPD themselves, they can't just say, oh, give me the data and I'll do it for you. And then even if they had even a snapshot, that is in that specific point in time. The amazing thing is it's constantly updated, and that's what the retailers get when subscribing.
Okay.
Well, that's
Interesting. Very
I know our strategy specialist, and she's good.
So, any more questions as the management team of Amazon?
I just have one more small point. I don't know if you're giving this presentation again, but it would be really helpful from a judge's point of view to take an example, a product or supplier or something, and just say, here's a supplier, here's how they have their LCA, here's their EDP, here's an example of the whole entire thing that you guys are looking at. That way we have something tangible. Yeah.
Okay, so we will now fall out with her beginning
Oh, sorry.
of Amazon management and give you feedback about the presentation and stuff. Okay, so did you have?
That was my, yes.
That was it? Okay, so I had a very hard time finding anything wrong with your presentation, to be honest. And this is a picky on me point. I really don't think it's that important, but it's just, in my entire career, I had to read documents. And the first thing you do, so this EPD, you started talking about it before you defined it. And in the real world, you cannot do that. As soon as you're going to use an acronym, you must put the full name and then put it in quotation marks and parentheses. That's just my training. So, it's a picky point. And then you described it in one of the slides as something else, but then later on, it said EPD is Environmental Product Declaration. But you explained it as something else.
So I was trying to make it just
More,
something that you can just commit to your memory. So
Understand.
Of course.
Yeah.
We tried to move it up as early as possible. We didn't want to say, hey, we're Foresight, and this is a bunch of jargon. So
Yeah.
we tried to get it as early as we thought possible. But I just wanted you guys to understand while we were developing, our framework, that when we say EPD, it is essentially a nutrition
Yeah.
label for the environmental
Got it.
output of a product.
Got it. Okay. You guys did an excellent job.
We appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Somebody's going to have to come out of the woodwork to beat you in my eyes so far. But I've got 2 more presentations, but you did a great job. The presentation was great. Good eye contact. I mean, I have to say, I'm really impressed. Nobody's reading any notes. Everybody has obviously practiced this, or if not, you're really good on your feet. And you're doing an excellent job with eye contact. Your slides were, just like I like to see it. This is the problem. This is how we're going to solve it. And the nice thing was, it was a positive thing. It wasn't you're taking, okay, board of directors, you're doing this wrong, you have to fix it. This was something, it was optimistic. It was something to do. And I mean, if all this is real, you guys should be presenting to Amazon.
It's an idea we believe in.
Yeah.
It's an idea we believe in.
Yeah.
Well, it's really good, and I'll be interested, not asking you now because we have to be blind, but it'd be interesting to see what school you come from.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you know anyone on Amazon, let us know.
Because I'm not as tech savvy as my colleagues, it took me a while to catch on to what you were talking about with what was meant and what's involved in the EPD. And as my colleague suggested earlier, if you could use an example and maybe compare it to something that people are familiar with, like the food labeling stuff, that would be helpful, because I was struggling at first to kind of catch up with you guys.
We'll be sure to reaffirm that point if we do this presentation again in the future to Amazon.
It's good.
Thank you. We appreciate
you.
that.
Yeah, just.
Yeah, I mean, I learned something. I didn't know about this fork to farm, or farm to fork rather.
Yeah.
And that's why I like doing these presentations. I seem to always learn something, and I didn't even know about BCCA, you know,
Yes.
Buy Clean California.
You guys probably become some like sustainable experts at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. But I like the fact that if this were put in place, you could say, okay, give me the most sustainable strawberries you've got, you know, or whatever. Okay.
Exactly.
You know, so.
So each product would be individually labeled with this, in your model, with the EPD. So if there are 2 sets of strawberries, they could have different ratings, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
They have different growers and yeah.
So you can make very easily, as you're shopping, you can look at the product and say, oh, look at that. Because now you look at Chobani, you look at whatever product there is, and you can say, I don't know. You know, you sort of just have to look at the information on the back and
Islamic
try to
yogurt
believe
sounds
them.
exciting.
Yeah, but you can say, okay, this was grown 20 miles away, the other one was grown in, you know, I don't know.
Right now, you pick up a strawberry the size of your hand, and you can only imagine. So, imagine you quantify that.
Now, this is interesting. I went to a food and wine tasting, and I happened to sit next to some people that I think somebody gave their tickets away, and they were from the farm, and they told me if they're big strawberries, they're not organic. They said
Right.
the organic strawberries are small.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything that's gigantic, claiming to be organic, don't believe it.
We hope
Yeah.
to not
You know,
put big strawberries to death, though.
I have 2 comments. Presentation spectacular, so not a dig at all, but you have to kind of read the room a little bit. Your budgets are kind of small, and
Yeah.
Amazon kind of has a lot of money. We didn't know if it was $1 million or $1
Billion?
Yeah. We'd have
And
expected
then
$1 billion.
And
Yeah.
the other
Yeah.
thing, I've just pictured myself in the store, and I'm looking, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to want to buy the local from the small person. They have the advantage.
Mm-hmm.
That's great for the small person, but now you've got the really big guys looking bad, like the Coca-Cola. Okay, Hawaii, I understand, but you're going to get some pressure from the big boys, maybe. So maybe there's got to be something else to level the playground. I don't know.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, what I would argue, this is my personal perspective, but if anything, this does level the playground. If, you know, as you say, big boys would be pushing back against this, it's because probably what they're selling isn't the best thing that you could be purchasing as a consumer. So there probably will be a lot of flack received from larger corporations, but that doesn't mean that we should be discouraged from trying to push for more transparent consumer products.
Well, and let's take the strawberry example. So maybe there's a better EPD number on one set of strawberries, but that one's more expensive. So
Well,
I,
of
as a
course.
consumer, I'll just say, okay, do
Yeah.
I want a higher
Right.
EPD or a cheaper price?
Or a
And-
bigger strawberry.
And that's
Or
basically the same
Bible.
as with nutrition
Yeah.
labels now. You can say, oh, this one has more sugar, but this one has more fat, but now you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the
right.
thing. I might not know why should I pay more?
Right.
I mean, it says it's organic, but what does that really mean?
And
you
a lot of
know?
people greenwash.
Exactly.
A lot of
Yeah.
people slap a label
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
And Whole Foods is a great consumer base because they are more price inelastic, willing to pay more for the goods because
Yeah.
that's what they care about.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Plus they can pass it on, right?
Yeah.
Well, I really love the way you guys are so passionate about
Yep.
the
that's
presentation and your
obvious.
ideas. It's so obvious. I mean, like you had stated before, you know, nobody was reading anything. It's because your passion really shows and your excitement, and that you're wanting to go to Amazon and Whole Foods already. And I thought your slides were great. You know, an excellent idea, excellent program, very exciting, and great to know that, you know, it's already percolating in the European Union, and you know the construction industry is already doing it. So it's probably going to move forward into, you know, what we're doing in the United States. And it's wonderful that you combine these two, because the synergy between the two is just a kind of a natural. So kudos to you guys.
We really
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much.
Thank you.
Let me ask you a question about yeah, I can't help it. Can you explain the line just
We have till 10:45 just to let everybody know.
just
About 10
below
minutes.
the green line there? What are we looking at with those numbers?
Yes, so this forecasts the amount of suppliers that would subscribe to create your or to create their EPDs, and then below that is the retailer subscriptions. So the retailer subscriptions would come later on once we have enough data and for them to really see the different EPDs we created. Now we forecasted, if you see above the green line, the different growth rates. So we really took into account that once you get closer to that 2040 timeline, there's going to be a lot more demand for these EPDs, so it's going to grow at a much faster rate and a smaller rate right now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, here's an idea. So LinkedIn, you probably don't know this till you get to the working world, but LinkedIn has something called Sales Navigator, which we were using at the bank I worked for. And so we had a guy that went from Chicago to Cleveland so he could get appointments, and he had gone to Notre Dame. So the Sales Navigator lets you identify, like, put in criteria. He put in every CEO and CFO that went to Notre Dame. He had 68 appointments, before he even moved to Cleveland. So there must be some way, whether it's your university, that you could see employees people's a position in Amazon. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a way to find this stuff. You just guys have, if you really are serious about trying to pitch this idea, there's ways to do it. So find somebody who is Sales Navigator, because at the bank it was $1,000 per person for the license. Mm-hmm. But it was so productive that practically all the salespeople had it.
I did reach out to Mr. Balvino, who is the VP of Amazon Technology. Unfortunately, he didn't reply on LinkedIn, but maybe I'll find another way to,
And we'd love to speak to you all once the competition is, in its conclusion about this, because this really is something we would like to see implemented in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know anybody off the top of my head, but there must be some way, some connection. Somebody, it's 6 degrees of separation. Somebody knows somebody.
Yes.
At Amazon or Whole Foods. Mm-hmm. And I love Whole Foods. I think it's much better than Gelson's. I mean, they have some steak. You can buy a package of 4, the whole meal at Christmas time. So
I know what I was spending my Christmas.
the steak that is in the pastry.
Oh, yeah.
Like tartare American?
Beef
Beef Wellington, thank you. It is delicious.
Well, judges, thank
you so much for your time.
Thank you
for being here.
You're about to get some really clammy handshakes.
Oh, thank you.